My name is Morgan Craven. I'm the National Director of Policy, Advocacy and Community Engagement at IDRA. We are a nonprofit that is based in San Antonio, but we do educational equity work across the US South. And for our ARPA project, we held listening and learning sessions with students, parents, educators, and other experts and advocates to get community-based feedback on how school districts can best use their ARPA funds, not only to address their new COVID needs, but to really address the deep systemic issues that were exacerbated by the pandemic. And we want to make sure that as with all school funding, schools are using their funds equitably, which means to us it's to benefit the students that most need supports and services from their schools that have been historically marginalized by their schools and by the education system. So that would include students of color, students with disability, emergent bilingual students, often called English learners, and students from families with limited incomes. The most common need and recommendation for the use of funds centered around mental health services for everyone, for students, for adults in the school building. We had, a discussion around intergenerational mental health supports for families, and it was something that we, heard well before COVID that students were really, really asking for and pushing for. And certainly now, not only, from our listening and learning sessions and anecdotes that people shared, but the data are showing just the significant increase in the need for mental health supports. A really common recommendation was related to better family and student engagement. So better programs coming out of schools to really engage students and families in all sorts of things, whether it's like provision of services through the school, sort of like a community schools model, or just involving them in decisions that are being made at the school. So there were a lot of recommendations around how schools need to do a better job of evaluating their own current family engagement models. Some participants noted that school districts will often claim that they have a really strong family engagement, but they're using their own sort of ways to assess how successful those models are, and are in charge of the data and are in charge of framing the data. And so there's not a lot of trust from the community that what the school says is working is actually working, especially when they can recognize that those strong connections aren't there. I also really loved a recommendation someone had to use the funds to support basically an independent student engagement board that is in charge of assessing how a particular school district is performing in terms of student and family engagement, making recommendations, and then building those connections with the community. So even though the funding would come from the school would essentially have to commit to giving some level of autonomy to this board of students and parents so that they could help build those stronger connections. And again, this is an issue that existed well before COVID, particularly in communities of color, but was certainly made worse by COVID, especially with the long stretches of virtual learning where you didn't have any sort of opportunity to build in-person connection. We were doing a project where we were asking for community input in the middle of the summer when there were so many things that students and families and others were really dealing with. Obviously, COVID, here in Texas, which is where a lot of our participants came from, there were all sorts of issues that we were dealing with that touched on schools that were maybe unrelated to the funds, but that a lot of people were really participating in and putting a lot of energy into. So just making sure that we made space in a time and in a way that allowed for the greatest number of people to participate. A lot of people just got a lot out of the listening and learning sessions from the sort of ground level information that we were giving them about the funds. What we found was that a lot of people were just not aware of the amount of money that their school districts were getting through this particular relief package. They weren't aware that both the state and the school and their school districts were required to get community input in order to access and properly use the funds. And they weren't aware of sort of the broad range of uses for the funds, and that they could really be used not just for, personal protective equipment or, the digital divide, which are two really important uses, but also quite a bit of money that could be used to, address a range of issues that many of them had been thinking about and sort of being active in their communities around for quite some time. That where we are and where we need to go is to continue that education with communities and make sure that they understand like what this money is, where it can be used, and the fact that they can and should be involved in decisions about how it's being spent. And there's actually time to still do that. I had the opportunity to engage with a small group of participants and I got to talk about an issue that we were dealing with here in Texas that many other states are dealing with around classroom censorship bills. So I thought that was particularly helpful to be able to get the small group feedback on what we were doing and kind of troubleshoot not only what we were going through in Texas, but hear like some concerns that others had experienced and be able to like connect them to our own work. And I would just advise other, future participants to take advantage of the group. It's one thing that I know I need to go back and do is just kind of identify the people that I want to continue to connect with and reach out to them and really, develop a larger network for our work.